Hey guys, so I thought I would maybe go on a bit earlier. I was waiting for another channel to perhaps wrap up, but I think they are on 5 hours going on to 6 hours. So anyway, I think I'm going to start 5 minutes early anyway. I'm going to deal with a couple of things in addition to the autopsy, but I don't imagine this is going to be a longer than about an hour. But I do think it's going to be quite a compelling session. Pooh's Blustery Day says this ought to be interesting. Yeah, I think so as well. So the first thing I want to bring up is the grey hoodie. In AWP's coverage, they have somebody talking about seeing her in a grey hoodie. And either this is confirmation of that, or possibly they've seen this picture and then there's the grey hoodie. Who knows? The other thing I want to mention is this evening when I went to buy milk and some other supplies, I got an automatic. I got into the car. I tried to change the gears with the car off, and obviously it didn't work. I was also quite surprised that if you'd asked me, could you, I'm not sure if I would have known. I'm not sure if I knew that an automatic car can move forwards or backwards when it's not on. I'm not sure if I knew that. I know in terms of a stick shift, if it's in gear, it certainly won't move. Good to see you, Stephanie, and Terry Dean, and Pauline Buckles. So that's the other thing to mention is that when your car is not on, when an automatic vehicle is not on, you can't change the gears. So the impression I get is when law enforcement found the vehicle, they didn't do anything with the gear shift. Well, they couldn't. They would have just tipped it over and then they would have just dragged it out. And so all of the speculation about it was in neutral, whatever, or did law enforcement put it into neutral, is actually in a way meaningless, because the car would have, if it was in gear or in neutral, the wheels would have rolled anyway. So that's the second point to bring up. The third one is, I was just curious, what is the mainstream media making of all this? Is the mainstream media even paying attention to what's going on? I care about what the mainstream media thinks because I'm a former magazine journalist. I always find it interesting what their views are. So I did do a Google search and there's very little interest, very, very little interest. Basically just the one story, which if you think about it, very little interest in Adventures with Purpose. Adventures with Purpose got interest and coverage basically around the discovery, but of Kiely's vehicle, and then not really much beyond that. So this is the article that deals with it, and it's quite interesting that it highlights that she seemed drunk, that Kiely seemed drunk. It's also interesting, Sammy's words, that she told her mom that she was going to be the designated driver so that her mother wouldn't worry. And she talks about an alibi so that her mom didn't freak out. Just kind of interesting choice of words. Another interesting choice of words for me is people saying intoxicated. When last did you refer to yourself as intoxicated? Don't you just say, well, I was drunk, or I was very drunk, or I wasn't drunk at all? I just think that's kind of, I'm not trying to say it's red flag. I'm just saying it's different, I guess. So this is the article from the US Sun. Tragic search, heartbreaking new Kiely Rodni video reveals chilling details in mystery death of teen after major announcement. So that's really the only story that's really dealing with it, which I just find kind of interesting. Then I did find another article that came out a little bit earlier from the Reno Gazette Journal. That's this article. That came out a day ago, and it's written by Siobhan McAndrew. And if you go through this article, it refers to her death may be suspicious. Adventures with purpose, suggestion of foul play. And where's the other one? It looks suspicious to me, right? So they have highlighted, should I bring this up a bit bigger? They have highlighted 3 references made to suspicious foul play, but it's all from Adventures with Purpose. There's one. There is the next one. And where was the third one? Suspicious, yeah. There's the other one. But you notice here, she says, in it, Nick Rinn and Doug Bishop discussed the possibility that her death may be suspicious. But here's the critical part, with no evidence. With no evidence. That's kind of what this particular mainstream media writer is highlighting, that there is talk about suspicious and foul play. So there's the word suspicious. There's the word foul play. There's the word, where is it again? There it is again, suspicious. And then there's also this reference to Bishop's first call is identified as Kiely's aunt. There's been some controversy about that. I can tell you, I mean, I'm just really curious. I'm just talking about something I observed. I did notice the Adventures with Purpose video that went up today, the one that is available to the public, was 47 minutes long. I wish I could give you the exact second, but I think the original was 49:20 something, and the new one is 47. So about 2 minutes of it was edited out, and it appears that the call that was made to family, that was edited out. Make of that what you will. So yeah, I think the part to highlight here is that this journalist basically says, well, they said it looks suspicious, it looks like foul play, but in her opinion, it's without any evidence, right? Without any evidence. Do you agree with that? Do you think that there is evidence, or do you think there's absolutely no evidence of something being suspicious? Okay, so that's this article from the Reno Gazette Journal. I actually contacted Katie Dowd, the lady who wrote this article, and this one came out August 22nd, the day that Kiely was found. She spoke about how it turned into a nightmarish internet witch hunt. I actually reached out to her, I sent her a tweet, I asked her if she would like to talk about social media and true crime. And didn't hear back at all, like zero. I didn't follow up, but I heard zero response. So I wonder whether she associates me with what she sees as the witch hunt, or what she sees as this negative side of the coverage. The other thing I want to bring up is the idea of social media, investigating social media. What I'm seeing a lot of is people going on to the Instagram profiles of teenagers, but not just that, also engaging with them, asking them questions, screen grabbing it, and then putting it in their videos, and then saying, I don't know why they stopped communicating with me. Also, this person's spoken, that one's spoken, but this one hasn't. So I think that's suspicious. Again, if you think about that and you think about what she's saying about a witch hunt, I just feel a bit troubled by this, given how young these kids are. That's all. I think, and tell me if you agree or disagree. I think in true crime, when you let's say, for the sake of argument, that we have been investigating a car accident for the past almost a month, right? Let's say all of this time since August the 5th, August the 6th, we are now approaching September 3rd. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that we've been investigating a car accident. I'm talking about the whole true crime community. If you think about it, the true crime community, to a hammer, everything's a nail. If you're a hammer, everything around you is a nail. Well, the true crime community, whenever someone goes missing, it's suspicious. There's a suspect. There's lies, deception, and murder. And of course, at the same time that Kiely went missing, the couple also went missing. We knew how that turned out. And we also know now how that turned out, but has that changed any minds? So I wonder, could this be a true crime case where there was no crime at all? I mean, besides underage drinking. This may be a true crime case where there was no crime at all. And that's, I think if you're a true crime channel that wants to grow and wants to have a high profile story that you can dig into, well, a true crime case where there was no crime, that's going to be a bit of a bummer, isn't it? There may be a crime, yeah, and the crime may be underage drinking. So yeah. Do you guys remember the case of Harley Dilly? Harley Dilly was a Ohio teen. He was 14 years old, and he disappeared. And there was quite a lot of suspicion in the beginning about his parents and their demeanor, and were they worried enough, right? And it turned out that poor Harley, it was really quite a tragic story. It turned out that he climbed into a chimney and got stuck in it, and it was there was no crime at all. It wasn't murder, it wasn't kidnapping, it wasn't sex trafficking. It was a kid messing around when he should have gone to school. Do you guys remember that? Yeah, that was definitely a sad case. I mean, if you think about what happened to Kiely, it's as gut-wrenching. It's kind of as gut-wrenching. Yeah, misadventure. Sadie Thompson says, is this clickbait, or are you going to say something about the autopsy? I am going to go to it now. I must say, the crowd, obviously there's a new crowd in terms of this case. Pretty nasty. But I must also say, and this is in terms, mods, just bear this in mind, So I'm going to invite you guys to be as nasty and as rude as you want to be, so that we can then identify you guys and just kick you off. Okay, so if you've got something nasty to say or an insult to say, just let us have it so that we know where you are. Okay. So the last thing I want to mention before we go into the autopsy thing is Jagger apparently posted a week ago, as long as a week ago, he posted that it's quite simple what happened. These are his words. He said, she was drunk driving on a steep shoreline. That's his assessment. And he's a kid of, I'm not sure exactly how old he is, 17, 18 years old. Is this young kid right and most of the true crime community wrong? Isn't it drunk driving on a steep shoreline? And so that's where the autopsy comes in. Is the autopsy going to be able to confirm this one way or the other? And that's why I put up the poll. If there was intoxication, please vote in this poll if you haven't. If there was intoxication, do you think an autopsy or toxicology would be able to prove that? Now, bear in mind, the Kiely was in this vehicle for 16 days, I think. 16 days, so more than 2 weeks. It's a long time to be submerged in fresh water. And if you think about it, if you think it's just alcohol, if you think about, let's say, if you imagine this is alcohol, right? Obviously, more alcohol is consumed than that, but you then are submerged, or I am submerged in water for 2 weeks. Is that what I've just ingested now? I mean, imagining it's alcohol, is that going to be easily found, right? What about water going into the mouth? All of that, right? Is that going to be a factor? The other thing that is, I think, very important to bear in mind, and those who understand the Chris Watts case will remember this, there was the question on whether Shanann Watts, whether there was alcohol in her system. So when Shanann was out in this field for a couple of days, Shanann Watts, and then when they performed the autopsy, they found that her blood alcohol was quite high. Now, this is the part that makes it a little bit complicated. When a cadaver is exposed to the elements for a length of time, part of the decomposition process is that alcohol forms naturally. So how are you going to tell the difference between that and the other thing, right? How are you going to tell the difference between that and the other thing? So Kai Cat says, I'm surprised people don't realize how available drugs and alcohol are to minors and always have been. Paul T says, yes, because it is absorbed through the bloodstream. Danielle says, alcohol in the system doesn't matter. I feel there was still foul play. Okay. So now we're going to deal with the autopsy and sort of how it works. So we're only about 11 minutes into the live stream based on the time it would have been. And so let's get going. I'm just going to bring that up a bit bigger. Let's just do that. Okay. So over the past few days, we've been focused, if not fixated, on all things mechanical, tires, windows, gears. I want to shift the narrative now to human biology, chemistry, and the challenges of alcohol screening, where there is a drowning death. What we're going to do is examine not only two case histories involving drowning victims, who spent extended periods underwater. One was for 2 weeks, another for 4. But we're also going to look at the challenges. We're going to look at it from the perspective of the technicians, the medical professionals. What are they going to be faced with in determining accurate ethanol concentrations post-mortem, including time of death? Now, that to me is already quite a weird thing, is when you start going through the literature, they talk about ethanol. Ethanol is alcohol, alcohol is ethanol, but it's just quite weird how already the terminology is changing. So the idea here isn't to make the case for whether or not drowning is the cause of death or whether the manner of death is accident or otherwise. All we're going to do is focus on how the forensics will go about finding out what the alcohol levels were given the water component. So in other words, if this was any other case, you would say, okay, test for, perform the autopsy and do toxicology. But this is a somewhat unique case because someone was submerged for about 16 days, right? How does that change the approach? That's the one question. The other one is, does it change the approach, right? Jessica says the chairs would be upside down, so how she's floating into the boot. Jessica, I guess there are 2 ways of thinking about it. The one is that the car didn't immediately turn upside down. So there was a time that the car was the right side up, right? I think you've got to think about the car is in motion and the person inside it, while she's alive, is in motion, maybe post-mortem also in motion. Okay, so, but anyway, what we want to focus on here is the autopsy. So we're now going to deal with source material from the Journal of Analytical Toxicology, volume 31, published in 2007. It's titled Loss of Ethanol from Vitreous Humor in Drowning Deaths. Now, again, don't be confused that loss of ethanol refers to alcohol. It's just another word for it. So you can see it's peer-reviewed. It's a case report. There are a couple of cases. We're going to deal with 2 of them. As we go through these 2 case histories, think about the intertextualities. Think about how is Kiely Rodni's case definitely similar? How is Kiely Rodni's case maybe similar? And how is Kiely Rodni's case different, right? That's what we're going to do now. So, guys, I'd like to invite you to put on your thinking caps. So if you've got other thoughts, try and sort of put them aside and try and just concentrate. We're going to deal with case history 1 and then case history 2. So here's the first case history. Case 1 was a 25-year-old male graduate student. So it's already someone who's a bit older. So obviously his size will be bigger than Kiely. He's 9 years older. Also, it's a male student. That does have some implications as well. There might be more alcohol in a male and also in an older male. Interesting, it's also a graduate student, right? It's also a young person that could have drunk or gotten drunk or not. And that's actually a question that's going to come up. Did this 25-year-old drink? Yes or no? So he was at a local university, he presented a research paper, and then he attended a banquet. So it's almost a carbon copy of Kiely, just in the sense of he went to a banquet, she went to a party. He's a student, she's a student. Of course, he's a college student, she's a kind of a school student. Then he attempted to walk home that evening despite an outside air temperature of minus 25 degrees Celsius. And I'm really not sure where this happened. It was in Canada. But anyway, you kind of have a similar scenario, though broadly it's similar, where Kiely attempted to drive home. The thing that was difficult, I think, for Kiely was darkness and intoxication while driving. With this guy, I think it was intoxication and it being so cold. Maybe he didn't appreciate just how cold it was. And so anyway, he was never seen alive again. So he disappeared. He drank, or he attended a banquet, and then he disappeared, and it was very cold. The next day, police retraced his suspected route and noted a single pair of footprints leading partway across a frozen river. So already what you have there is they've almost done better than they did in the Kiely Rodni case, meaning at least they found this guy's footprints. I mean, I don't think they really found Kiely's vehicle tracks, right? Although they did find a ping. So in this case, the ping is the single pair of footprints, and it leads partway across a frozen river. So they see footprints going towards a frozen river, right? And in this case, we know that Kiely left a ping right beside the reservoir. And they made they took the next step and saw the footprints ended in the middle of the river where a large slab of ice had tipped up, right? So they basically probably assumed this guy fell through the ice right here. The footprints ended here. I think he fell through the ice right here. It's kind of like Kiely's digital trail ended here. Well, maybe we should look here, except they didn't. Then the victim was found downstream 31 days later, fully clothed, right? So he didn't go for a swim. And it's quite amazing that it took them about a month, right? It took them about 4 weeks to find this guy. Several witnesses from the banquet he attended reported that the victim was a binge drinker, right? So here you kind of have another similarity. You have witnesses saying, let's just bring myself up a little bit. You have witnesses saying, this guy, we know him, and he kind of drank quite a lot. Oh my God, scroll, please. Okay, I'm going to just kick you out. Okay, so let's try and go back to where I was. The witnesses say that this guy was a binge drinker and he appeared drunk on the night that he disappeared. It's exactly the same thing with Kiely. Some people who were there said that she was drunk. And also, I think Sammy said that she said her intention was to get drunk as well. But his family said, no, we don't think that that's true. We don't believe it. And we think the death was suspicious. Carolee Boxall, good to see you. Pauline Buckle says he probably mistook the river for frozen dry land and he was intoxicated. Or he was going on a shortcut and he didn't think, with it being so cold, that the lake would be so kind of fragile. Okay, so Ernest says, I know you've checked the air temperature, but I wonder what the water temperature was in the lake. Yeah, it's another question. Okay, so let's continue. So now the question is, was this guy's death suspicious, yes or no? What do you think the answer is? Let's do a quick poll. Do you think this guy's death was suspicious, or do you think he got drunk, walked into the water, and disappeared? Just based on the information we have here, what do you guys think? Patrons don't answer because I think you know the answer, because I put it on Patreon. Do you think his death was suspicious, just based on the information we've got right here? So far, everyone says no. Anyone think his death was suspicious? Joe Huck says no. KG says no. Anyone say yes? Okay, no. But I mean, a lot of this is similar to Kiely. What's different about it? Ashley says yes. Okay, so there's a yes. So let's see if we can change Ashley's mind here. Okay. At autopsy, water-induced wrinkling of the skin was noted, which is just that showed that he was in the water for a long time. There was excess fluid in the sphenoid sinus, but no evidence of injury or disease. No evidence of injury is obviously an indicator that there was no foul play. If there was a broken bone, if there's a cut, if there's bruising, if there's blood loss of some kind, all of that would be potential evidence of foul play. Now, with Kiely Rodni, you would ask the same question: does she have any injuries? And that might be a bit more problematic because when the car hit the reservoir, could she have been injured? Also, in her attempt to, if she survived the entry and if she struggled to get out, she may have banged herself on the side of the vehicle. But I mean, nevertheless, you've got to talk about life-threatening injuries, like a serious injury. Would you expect to see that? Will you see that, yes or no? You could make the argument that she may have been drowned, and I really don't want to feel conspiracy theorists, but I suppose if you really want to, you could say she drowned before she got in the car, and so you just wouldn't know one way or the other. Anyway, the interesting thing is central blood vitreous fluid, we'll get to that, urine, bile, liver, and gastric contents were all submitted for toxicology. Blood and vitreous humor specimens were preserved. The cause of death was eventually determined to be drowning with acute ethanol intoxication as a contributing factor, and the manner of death was accidental. So what they showed through performing this autopsy and toxicology was that this guy was indeed very intoxicated. You see the word acute there. He wasn't just a little intoxicated, he was very intoxicated. And so they determined that this was an accident. So the question that I asked at the beginning, right, in terms of the poll, I said, if there was intoxication, do you think an autopsy would be able to show it? 83% say yes. Let me ask the same question in a different way. If it shows intoxication, do you think it can show the level of intoxication? Do you think it can show acute, medium, slight intoxication? What do you think about that question? Do you think the technology is advanced enough that even in a watery grave situation, and even with, in this case, this guy had been underwater for 30 days, but bear in mind also in very, very cold circumstances, do you think it can show, okay, very intoxicated or not, or just, well, that person was intoxicated? So Kai Cat says, if his body was frozen for 31 days, would that matter? Well, it wouldn't have been frozen, but it would have been unusually cold. I don't think it was found like in a block of ice. Ashley, hair keeps a record of drug use, not alcohol. It's all optics says yes, they can accurately conclude the level of intoxication. So that then brings us to the next case. So let me bring that up. So I think before I bring that up, let me just inform you guys of something else. Let me just show you something. So I mentioned vitreous fluid. That is the vitreous fluid. It's basically the metabolic fluid found inside the eyeball, right? And that is a very good source of the chemistry inside the human body post-mortem. It's a better source, for example, than let's say the blood or stomach contents or things like that, right? So just to be clear, when you talk about vitreous, it's the inside of the eyeball. But now the question comes up, if you are in water, is it possible that water can any of these compounds that are here be affected by water around it? That's the question. Can it alter the chemistry one way or the other? That's kind of the question. Okay, so now we're going to, let me just show you another image. That's kind of from the top there, you see vitreous humor. So it's this area, it's filled with a fluid. So again, from this perspective, you would say if there's water here, so there's perhaps the nose and the side of the face. If there's water around the eye, is that going to impact what's inside the eye? Sunflower says alcohol causes dehydration. Okay. I'm just trying to think. I think Sadie Thompson was the one who said, is this clickbait? Anyway, so okay, so the answer to the question is actually yes, that water can actually influence the readings you're going to get, the accuracy of the readings in the vitreous humor. So although the vitreous humor is an excellent source of some of these compounds, what this study shows is that there's actually a better alternative, which I found it quite interesting. I certainly learned something, and that's what I wanted to share with you guys. Yeah, you're right, Stephanie. Okay, so let's go on now to case number 2. So I'm just going to blow it up. So again, think about how is this case similar to Kiely Rodni? How is it exactly the same or very similar, or let's just say the same, and then how is it completely different? So in this case, it's a younger male victim. So there's also a male victim, but he's younger. He's only 6 years older than Kiely. He was also a male victim, and he'd been missing for almost exactly the same period, right? 14 days, Kiely about 16 days. After a severe summer storm, so what's quite interesting here is you had weather scenarios in both of them. In the one you had, it was very cold, and in this one, it's summer, but you had a weather-related thing. With Kiely, you could ask, is weather related? Was the fact that it was cold a factor? Was the fact that it was night a factor? Was the natural environment a factor? Anyway, sorry, I may actually have gotten this wrong. So after severe summer storm, workers dredging a weir hooked the fully clothed deceased. So I don't know whether it really means he disappeared during the storm, but I still think the point is valid. How often do people go missing due to natural phenomena like weather, darkness, a bend in the road, or whatever? Anyway, also with the Lacey Peterson case, there was a storm that actually dislodged the cadavers from the muddy San Francisco Bay sea bottom, or the bottom of the bay. So that can also have an impact in finding or recovering lost people. In the Kiely Rodni case, you could make the argument that did the drought to some extent cause it to happen? I mean, if the dam had been full, would the vehicle have gone so steeply down? Also, was the fact that the water sank 4 feet, would that have, if it didn't sink 4 feet, would they have found her as easily? I think they would have eventually found her. Anyway, let's get back to this. So there was a severe summer storm. They dredged the weir and they hooked a fully clothed deceased. So what, I don't know if you notice in this scenario and in the previous one, both are fully clothed. Kiely was also fully clothed. So I think you could, I don't want to be insensitive, but I think you could make the comment that if Kiely was found without clothes on, that could have a bearing on what had happened to her. If she's found wearing clothing, do you see where I'm going with that? It says he was subsequently identified by fingerprinting, right? So even after 14 days, that they couldn't identify him based on optics, just on the visual. His last visit to a health center documented dizziness and faintness, daily ethanol use. I'm not quite sure why they don't just say alcohol, but I mean, he was obviously someone who also was I guess, an habitual drinker if he was drinking every day. Early schizophrenia, panic attacks related to social phobia, and possible hypoglycemia. Now, if you try and think about that in a global sense to Kiely, you say, is there any mental aspect that's at all relevant here? What about the social phobia? And I think the only thing we discussed that comes into this ballpark is the isolation or the possibility of isolation. I think if anything, she had the opposite of social phobia. I think she wanted to socialize. But anyway, this guy's drinking had to do with not wanting to be around people, whereas I think Kiely's had to do with wanting to be around people. I just think it's quite interesting to draw that comparison. He had previously talked about suicide and was scheduled for a court appearance the day that he disappeared. So we're not going to go to what happens next immediately. Let me ask you again. He previously talked about suicide and he was scheduled for a court appearance. So let me ask you, based on this information, do you think that it's likely that what happened to him was an accident, meaning he didn't intend, even if it was self-inflicted, he didn't intend for what happened to him to happen to him? Or do you think not? Do you think it was an accident? So if it was an accident, write accident. If you think it was an accident, if you think it was suicide, put suicide. But you can see how this scenario is slightly different to the other one. Go Bungle says there's a very good article on the difficulties of investigation of drowning deaths or practice review. Okay, so those of you who are interested, go and check that out. Carol, good to see you. Terry says they word that like maybe unalived himself. Moonshadow says, I think he had a death wish and the walking out was okay. Okay. Angela says, I definitely think there's foul play involved. Not quite sure what that's in reference to. Danny says, I can't tell without knowing his actual cause of death. It's just a useful exercise to say, here is so much information. What do you think, based on this information, what do you think the outcome is, right? So this is the outcome. At autopsy, water-induced skin wrinkling was noted with adipocere formation and some decomposition. all that refers to, the water-induced skin wrinkling, is kind of confirming that this person was underwater for a long time, right? They didn't just fall in the water an hour ago, kind of thing. There was a large volume of fluid within the stomach and lungs, excess fluid in the sphenoid sinus space within the skull. Findings were typical of drowning. No significant recent injuries. So let's just deal with that. Sorry, let me just get to the end of this. So no significant recent injuries or disease were noted. Central blood vitreous fluid, that's from the eye, urine, bile, liver, and gastric contents were submitted for toxicology testing. Blood and vitreous humus specimens were preserved with fluoride oxalate. The cause of death was determined to be drowning with ethanol intoxication. I think that's some other drug. Listed as a contributing factor, and the manner of death was undetermined. So the answer, the conclusion reached by the investigators was, we don't know, undetermined, we're not sure. So here, I don't know if you noticed, they didn't say acute intoxication. They simply said there was a certain amount of intoxication associated with another substance as well. And so they couldn't decide one way or the other, was this an accident? Was this suicide? But I don't think they think it's foul play, though. I think they thought it's either suicide or an accident, but they couldn't decide one way or the other. There was a certain amount of contextual support for suicide, but there just wasn't enough information ultimately to draw that conclusion. So do you see, even in a report with all of this information, it's okay to say, we just don't have enough information, we don't know. Yeah, he also had low blood sugar, that's true. Danny, I didn't know that. Is that for sure? I wonder if I can maybe look that up quickly. Pooh's blustery day says, Nick, acute means now. Sorry, I disagree with you, but never heard of acute meaning now. I'm just trying to. Terry says the severe storm leads you to believe accident. Why were they dredging the weir? Terry, I don't know if the severe storm was at the time. I think the severe storm actually happened when they dredged the weir, and that's how they were trying. It's not very well. The narrative's not that clear. I just want to check that. I suppose it is quite interesting. Let's have a look at what the substance is. Antihistamine medication. Okay, antihistamine. So you wouldn't really expect that to be, if you think about it, if he took antihistamine medication, that doesn't seem like he was really suicidal, that he was like, well, I'm taking some kind of substance to relieve my horrible stress, right? Benadryl. Terry Dean says, okay, so they weren't dredging because they were looking for a missing person. I'm not sure. It just says there was after severe summer storm, workers dredging a weir hooked a fully clothed deceased. So I don't know whether they're just trying to clear the weir. It's just not clear. They're not completely clear in their narrative. Okay, so I'm gonna go on to, so this is going to get a bit technical where we're going into now. It's basically just FYI, in terms of the, not, what's the word, the unpleasant task of finding out what really happened to Kiely by studying compounds and by looking at things in a microscope, right? And I just found this interesting. I'm sure the true crime community that are serious may do as well. So I just do think it's really interesting that in this scenario they weren't actually able to decide what exactly had happened. Now, in the a year ago or so, I could have invited the guy who wrote this report onto my channel. We were quite good friends. He studied forensic science. I actually commissioned this report. I asked him to let me know what he thought about the toxicology of Shanann Watts. His name's Thomas Mollett. He did it in June 2018. The district attorney at the time did the same thing. Thought Shanann Watts's blood alcohol seems high, and then they sort of did an investigation and tried to find out, is there any evidence that she was drinking on the one hand, on the other hand, in other words, contextual, and on the other hand, is there any evidence, does the blood alcohol, is it normal, according to normal decomposition or not? And both this guy and the DA's office reached the same conclusion, that the numbers were absolutely in line with what you'd expect, right? That's normal blood alcohol, a normal increase in blood alcohol. But unfortunately, this guy died sort of towards the end of last year. So you can actually see, he says, following is my pro bono opinion. It's just, anyway, let's continue. So we're going to now deal with methods. And so the study is trying to find out what was the ultimate result of both of these cases, right? It says they were subject to routine alcohol screening by headspace gas chromatography with flame ionization detection for the presence of ethanol and other volatiles. Once again, ethanol is another reference to alcohol. Blood was screened for the presence of drugs, right? And so that's all we really want to look at here. I may be talking nonsense when I say this, but I know certain light spectrums that come from stars can indicate what those stars or planets, what the substances are made of. So in other words, there's more yellow or blue or whatever, then there's more of a certain substance in that sphere, right? And I wonder whether it's something similar with this, where they screen it using gas chromatography. I think it's the way that it burns or something. I'm not. It's not my area, but it sounds like it's got to do with how the light responds to these substances, and that they then determine what the chemical composition is. I just do know that they do use that process in astronomy. So anyway, let's go on to the next section here. It says here, it has been previously reported that ethanol can cross into the eye by diffusing through the sclera, giving rise to elevated vitreous ethanol concentrations. Now, do you remember we looked at the eye over there and over there, right? So what that's all about is just saying that when you drink, some alcohol actually goes into your eyeball, right? And so that's why the eyeball is a good place to check for that sort of thing. It goes on to say, it has also been reported that extended immersion, 6 weeks in lake water, resulted in low vitreous ethanol compared to the blood level, right? So what that's telling you is, and I don't know whether Kiely's case qualifies as extended immersion. I mean, it's barely half as long as that, but I think it's nevertheless possibly a factor where you might say it's going to possibly result in low vitreous ethanol compared to what it should be. Does that make sense? So they go on to say, although it is probably reasonable to conclude that the ethanol concentrations in both cases are consistent with consumption prior to death, in other words, you are going to get, whatever the value, you are going to get a yes, no for did the person drink at the time that they died. You're going to get a yes, no. The more particular question is, are you going to get an accurate reading, right? And what they're kind of saying here is, well, the longer they're in water, the less reliable it's going to be. Here's the insight here. I think I've got to read the whole sentence. Although it is probably reasonable to conclude that the ethanol concentrations are consistent with consumption prior to death and loss of ethanol from the eye due to prolonged immersion in water, determination of the ratio in urine, right, would provide confirmation of this. This was important given that the family in case one was adamant in their claim that the victim was not intoxicated. So obviously in the other case, there was no family saying, don't tell us that this person drank, right? So they didn't really care that much about the was the person intoxicated, simply, sorry, not like extremely intoxicated. In the first case, they wanted to know, was the person extremely intoxicated, yes or no, right? Was that very relevant, right? And it turns out it was. They say it is acknowledged that post-mortem synthesis of significant amount of ethanol is unlikely because of the low temperature of the river water. So can you see the low temperature? I'm not sure if I actually understand this. I think what they're saying is that there wouldn't be, I think what they're saying is that the body wouldn't produce its own ethanol because the water was so cold. Does that make sense? In other words, the colder the water, the more unlikely it is that the body would produce its own alcohol and create this exaggerated result. Is that a fair assessment, would you guys say? Just have a look at some of your comments. Terry says, so weird to think of alcohol in your eyeball when drinking. Terry, I don't think it's a huge amount. It's for the amount of eyeball fluid, it's a small amount, but it's nevertheless relevant. Ken, let's hope so. Okay. Pooh's Blustery Day says it's like a mathematical equation for the numbers of VH tox screen. Okay. Okay, so let's go from that to the next section here. Results and discussion. Almost done. Right, so the toxicology findings are summarized in table 1. I'm not going to show that to you, but it says the possibility of contamination, post-mortem formation, or post-mortem diffusion from the stomach always has to be considered when interpreting blood or urine ethanol findings. So they're kind of just saying the stomach is not a very good area, right? So if you've eaten food and the food is fermenting in your stomach and it's creating alcohol, that's not going to be a good place to check for that. The longer the time between death and sampling, the greater the possibility that post-mortem formation of ethanol could have occurred. So that's exactly what I mentioned at the beginning, is that you don't want to confuse the natural formation of ethanol post-mortem with the pre-existing alcohol / ethanol that was already there. You don't want to confuse the two. You don't want to say, well, there's a huge amount of alcohol here. This person was definitely drunk. You've got to bear in mind the environmental situation, including the temperature of the water. Someone actually mentioned that earlier. So someone says, this goes on to say, post-mortem formation of ethanol rarely occurs in vitreous humor. In other words, you never or very seldom going to get post-mortem formation. It's just quite an interesting, I didn't know that. You're not going to get post-mortem formation of alcohol in the eye, just because of the idiosyncratic situation. It's almost like, I would imagine, it's almost like an egg. Typically, an egg doesn't just go off. You don't have to put an egg in a refrigerator. When you buy eggs, they are to some extent sealed from the outside. I don't mean indefinitely, but just if you compare putting an egg on the counter that you bought at a supermarket and a banana, the one is going to go off much quicker than the other. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So the eye, in terms of the person, has that same kind of quality. Yeah, you're right, Bria. Heat creates gases in fermentation and or ethanol. The alcohol level can go up. Okay, so let's get back to that. Where was I? Sorry, I'm a little bit lost. Results and discussions, this one. Okay. Yeah, fresh eggs need no refrigeration. We've got a very clever lady amongst us, Brenda Briggs, real estate. She says, gas chromatography uses pure helium as a carrier for a sample liquid. Then columns selectively slow down constituent elements. Lighter ones emit first and so on, resulting in a graph of elements. So Brenda, let me ask you a question. Is it ultimately light readings that are used to determine what certain compounds are? I'm assuming the word chroma refers to light. Is that a correct assumption? Catherine says, we can't assume the vehicle went into the water at night now, given new info of the service guys witnessing. So, Catherine, if you take that thought further, then I think we must kind of come back to it, but let's just start with that thought. So then Kiely, so you're saying Kiely was around the next day. So she didn't go home and she didn't turn on her phone and she didn't tell her mom anything. When everyone was searching for her, she still didn't respond. And she had her phone off literally hours and hours and hours going on, and that's normal. Like, she would just have her phone off the entire time. And then you've also got to account for her vehicle going into the reservoir in the end anyway. And then you've got to say somebody did that without anybody seeing. So in other words, someone had to bring Kiely's vehicle to the reservoir. So I presume not at night. So wasn't a vehicle spotted after that. So I don't know, I find it quite a weird thought process where you say that's more likely. Just find it a bit weird. Is that anyway? Okay, so let's get back to where we were. Sorry, that threw me for a loop there. The toxicology findings, that's not what I want to look at. I think it's further below that, results and discussion. Okay, yeah, so it's basically, sorry, just to end off here, it talks about post-mortem formation of ethanol rarely occurs in vitreous humor because the interior of the eye is a sterile medium. It's not influenced by the breakdown of the GI tract and migration of bacteria. Therefore, a vitreous humor ethanol concentration is regarded as a reliable indicator of the body burden of ethanol, right? But this is the part that's really interesting. Although it's very reliable, it's not as reliable as something else, urine. It says here, similarly, urine can be a useful specimen as it is usually sterile for a period of time after death. Urine does not generally contain a substrate for ethanol synthesis. That's kind of quite fancy language for saying alcohol won't spontaneously grow or develop in urine in the same way it won't do that in the eye. However, ethanol can be formed in urine if the person has a urinary tract infection. In other words, if there's originally bacteria in the urine, then that's a factor. And that then brings us to the conclusion here. The conclusion is, these cases demonstrate that in cases of prolonged immersion in water, ethanol can diffuse out of the eye, and therefore low vitreous blood ethanol ratio should not automatically be interpreted as evidence of post-mortem ethanol formation in the blood. So I'm not sure if you follow what is being said. They're saying if you found low amounts of blood of ethanol in the eye, that doesn't mean that there was a kind of a process of decomposition inside the eye. It actually means there was drinking involved. There was intoxication. And then they say determination of the urine ratio can assist in determining whether ethanol has been consumed prior to death. I must say, when I first read this report, my first thought was what they were trying to say was that urine analysis was a better or preferable way of checking ethanol in drowning victims. But what they're actually saying is both of them are, I think you don't use the one or the other, you use both of them. Does that make sense? Basically, the vitreous humor and urine are both substrates where alcohol can't develop on its own unless someone's got a bacterial infection. Then the urine aspect wouldn't really work. But basically, these are your two resources for accurate toxicology analysis. So I don't know what you guys thought about that. I learned a lot in studying this. I learned a lot from looking at the case studies and in how exactly they determine this. Veteran on YouTube, hi and welcome to TCRS. Good to see you. Terry says, I'd asked that on Patreon, does the body expel urine upon death? It's a good question. I think the answer is not always. It depends. It does. It doesn't always. There is a relaxation of all the body's functions, right? I think it depends where urine is in the bladder, and also where, in terms of the other digestive processes, at what stage they are. So it depends on that. You know, in the Chris Watts case, there was a post-mortem coffin birth. I don't think that is very common either. So that does happen. That happened post-mortem, but it's not very common. It's not like it'll happen every time. It happens very rarely during the decomposition of a body. Okay, that's basically it for me. So do you see how the temperature is quite relevant to this aspect? The temperature is going to be relevant to the calculations that they come up with. Did Brenda ever get back to me? Okay, Brenda says, remember that the car was vertical at one point as it flipped. The back would have been the top where an air would have been. Brenda, you are very clever. No, that's absolutely true. The rear end of the vehicle was sticking up in the air, and so that's the last place where the air pocket would have been. Bear in mind the air would sort of bubble up. That really does make sense, yeah. Okay, so we just passed an hour. I don't really want to be on here much longer. I feel like people are taking target practice at me. The service guy said she mentioned her phone was dead. Maybe she was arguing with the guy. He threw her phone in the water that night. Wild card theory. My personal opinion is, why does the first time this guy make an appearance is in this YouTube documentary? Why wouldn't you come forward? Why did he tell the family? Also, why did it take so long for him to realize this is Kiely? I mean, everybody knew about it. How come he didn't seem to notice? So just seems a bit strange. Very strange. Okay, so yeah, that is my spiel. I didn't really want to do edited synced audio episode. I thought I would just come on and do it this way. So that's my spiel. So basically what we looking at here is basically that they are probably going to be able to determine quite accurately the toxicology. That's likely. So let's have a look at the poll. 86% said, do you think they'll be able to prove intoxication? Often I kind of rig the poll that it's going to be hard to be correct, but here most of you definitely got it right. 86%, well done. I think a lot of you guys are watching CSI, so you know that technology is definitely caught up. 14% say no. But yeah, it is quite amazing how even being in the water for 16 days, they should be able to tell with a reasonable degree of certainty. I don't know what the situation is with, there are certain drugs that are water soluble. I'm not sure if fentanyl is. I'm not sure if opioids are. I don't know if opioids would even be a factor here, but I think there are some drugs that are water soluble. I'm not quite sure what the case is with that. Let's maybe take a few more questions, say for the next 5 minutes. Brits Creek said, I learned a lot on this live. Thank you. Fazza says, thank you for the great live, informative and useful. Yeah, I think it's great when you learn stuff. Like when you, one thing I learned was I didn't know, I've got an automatic vehicle. I didn't know it can be pushed forward or pulled backward without it being on. I mean, I know manual won't do that unless it's in neutral. So I definitely learned something in that department. Let's see if we can maybe go through a couple of these images while we're waiting for some more questions. So this is a fairly new image of Kiely, and I think she's in her vehicle. I think she's in her vehicle and in the back seat, and there you can actually see a sunroof, which is quite weird. You don't see it in, I mean, I'll say this under correction. I'm assuming this is her vehicle. Do you guys agree that this is her vehicle? Can you see there's a sunroof? I'm sure you guys know about this. On the September 10th, there will be a gathering to celebrate in Truckee to celebrate Kiely's life. There's something about Kiely that reminds me a lot of Gabby. The way that the wilderness claims this beautiful young life, that, and then you find her in the wilderness. You know what I mean? If you look at the artwork in this particular image, the sun, the lie of the land, the mountains, the woods, and she sort of comes out of it. I don't know. There's something about the landscape and the portrait going together that I think touches us. So again, that is where Kiely's was found, the vehicle. If you think about it in hindsight, and I know it's unfair to say this, but if you think about it in hindsight, if the original possibility was, could she have driven into the water? There were really only 3 places where she could have done that. This is one of them. I'm talking about where the road goes straight into the water. There were basically 3 places where she could have done that. There's one. There's one, and obviously they did set up their search over there. There's another one where no one seemed to really search, or not much. There's another area just around the corner here where the water goes where the road goes across, and I think there might be another one where the road goes straight in. But why wouldn't you concentrate your search there? Because you're also missing a vehicle. Again, hindsight does help, right? So this is from Adventures with Purpose. And I don't know where this cord goes into. It's a really long cord. But one wonders whether her phone is here. One wonders whether her phone is here. And this is just a reminder of who we're talking about. We're talking about this young 16-year-old who would have turned 17. And does it really have to be cloak and daggers? Or did Kiely just make a silly mistake like we've all made? There's another view. I wonder what that thing is over there. I thought it could be a hairbrush, but it might also be one of those things that you put on your phone on, like in your vehicle, like if you're doing a podcast or whatever. I've got one that sort of looks like that. I don't know whether the tripod is down there. Anyone got any other ideas what it could be? Sunflower says she does remind me of Gabby in that pic. Do you mean this picture? Yeah, hair does show drug use. So a lot of people misunderstood a video I made, and it seems like I put up a video and everyone seems to respond to the title. I really get the impression that a lot of people aren't really watching anything. But somebody made the comment here, ADP confirmed it was a neutral gear, right? That was what I responded to. That, and it was actually Stephanie who directed me to that, saying somebody said that ADP, meaning AWP, confirmed that it was in neutral. And I was really just trying to fact check that statement. That's why it was in inverted commas, that it wasn't in neutral. Or sorry, that they couldn't have determined that because they weren't allowed access to the vehicle. And so I think everyone was interpreting that as an attack on AWP, but it was a criticism of the assumption that AWP knew the car was in neutral because they would have gone into the car or something like that. That's really all that was about. It's quite amazing how in the early days of the crime scene that we were focused on the campground, if you remember. There wasn't really that much. There was interest in the water for a short while and then it stopped. And I think I accepted that they searched it thoroughly. I accepted that. So anyway, that is it. Guys, remember tomorrow there'll be another attempt to launch the Artemis 2 rocket. It's a test launch for the moon. Because this channel is True Crime Rocket Science, we are a little bit interested in actual rocket science. So we're holding thumbs that this launch is going to take place tomorrow. I think it's somewhere around almost 3 p.m. in Florida. I have also told my patrons that I haven't yet visited America, and I wouldn't mind visiting when the actual launch for the moon with a human crew aboard takes place. And I believe that's scheduled for May next year. So who knows? I would love to be in America when the real thing with a real crew blasts off. I'd love to do that, and who knows, maybe even do a live while it's happening. So let's see if that happens. Do I have any more images here? This is the last image I want to show you. And, I've heard people saying that was Kiely found in the backpack, and so it's almost like she was in the trunk, like it's a regular trunk. But look at all the space here. I don't quite understand this idea that it would be impossible to get to this area. I really don't understand it. This area isn't closed. This area isn't closed either. So the diver saw her through the window, sort of at the back. It wasn't. I mean, he had to be able to see her through the window. If Kiely was in this position, somewhere down here, he wouldn't have been able to see her because there is no window. So I just find all of that intrigue very weird. What's the? I suppose if you wanted to be intrigued, then that's how you think. Stephanie says, thanks for the visual. Katie says, it's a hatchback. Is there covering over the trunk? So, Katie, if there is a covering, it would have been impossible to see her. Do you follow what I'm saying? If this covering that's here, if this covering was over, you wouldn't be able to see her from the outside of the vehicle. Do you get what I'm saying? John Hammer says, I still say dark, disorientated, fear, panic, near impossible to survive. Kelly says, my son is going to the launch with his buddies. They're camping in Titusville. That's pretty awesome. Kendi says, the middle headrest appeared to be up in some pics. Brenda says, I would have expected her to be there unless her seatbelt was fastened. I wasn't surprised at all about it. I'm not really either. Okay, I think that's the one and only super chat. Why do you think that AWP seems to think it's foul play? Bria's question. I think my honest answer is AWP they're not like a true crime channel. They're divers. That's their expertise. The expertise is finding missing people. It's not true crime. True crime is slightly different. The other thing is they haven't done recoveries like this one in the past. I'm talking about where the vehicle has just gone in or gone in within the last 2 weeks. That's something that's quite different. Another aspect that I think is very different, I could be wrong, as far as I know, this is their most high-profile case. So this is a case that they do things differently. So, for example, where they would normally take a number plate off, this time they would leave it on. With normally where, because it's an active investigation, the family and the media and everyone's uncertain, there's this question of discretion. And should you contact the family immediately? Obviously, if someone's disappeared for 20 years, there's not that urgency to contact anyone. So I think all of those factors are different. I think the assumption that she's not in the driver's seat, the assumption that she's not in the driver's seat, but she's somewhere else, and that means it's foul play, I don't agree with that. I think that's reductionist and simplistic. The other side of it is, as I say, if you look at this image here, it's not like she's in that section. She's in this section above where the glass is. So it's not like she's, in the conventional sense, in the trunk of a vehicle, which you would say, anyone who is in the trunk of a vehicle, you would say is foul play. This is not in the trunk. This is at the back of the vehicle. And oxygen, air bubbles would have gone to the back of the vehicle, and Kiely may have gone to the back as well. An aspect that I think not everyone may have been aware of or thought about is if Kiely found herself in the vehicle, in water, and kicked out the passenger window. She may have kicked it out and it may have broken by itself, but she may herself have elected to try and get through the halfway open or a third open rear window. She may have thought that's a better option, right? There may have been less water coming through that window. So she may have crawled to the back to start trying to get through that. And then something else could have happened. You must remember it's not static, everything's moving. And she may have, in the attempt to go through the rear driver's side window that was partially open, the car may have tilted when that happened. And that may have made it difficult to go through there. The other aspect that just makes it, and your heart goes out to her, is that if it was dark and if she had the illumination of her phone, and if at some point her phone dropped into the water or her phone got wet, you must remember the same that applies to the car applies to her phone. If the car electronics gets wet and the lights go out and the battery doesn't work anymore, right? The electronics instantly go off in terms of the vehicle. There's the possibility that her phone will provide some illumination as long as it doesn't get wet. But the moment her phone gets wet, it'll be pitch dark. And that is a very horrible situation to be in. It's almost like being in a hole underground, right? and you must now find your way to the surface, but you've got no idea which way is up and which way is down. I'm talking about where there's no water, but it's pitch dark. You've got no idea which way is up and which way is down because it's pitch dark. And it's not like you can just sort of run around in the darkness because it's a cramped space. Plus, there's a time limit. It's like 1 minute or so that you've got to escape this trap, this metal trap. So the dark would be another factor making it very difficult to navigate. How to get out of that open window? Well, how to get out of that open window? Well, if you can't see it, what can you do? So she may have had illumination for a while, but as soon as that she lost that illumination, the challenge of escaping that moving thing with water coming in would have been very, very difficult. And naturally, being intoxicated would make that what do you call it? Not equation, that yeah, you know, basically problem even harder to solve, obstacle harder to overcome. Okay, let me just go through your last comments here. Veteran on YouTube says the very thought of what I would be thinking and doing in this scenario is chilling. And I'm a grown-up, absolutely. Because you must remember, it would have happened to her totally by surprise. She would be driving 1 minute and the next confronted with a time limit scenario, totally out of the blue. 1 minute you were laughing. Who knows whether she kissed a boy in the situation? Maybe she's thinking about that. And then the next thing, everything's different. She's in a totally new circumstance with all these things counting against her. Time limit, electronics that are now going to trap her in this vehicle, can't see anything, and all of this taking her by surprise. Brenda says, and without lights, it's easy to drive right into the water if you're impaired. Yeah. Karen says, water would have been rushing in that front passenger window. Yeah, absolutely. The front part is the lowest part of that vehicle. This is before it turns over. So she's just hit the water. She's going to be feeling water at her feet. She's going to be wanting to get out of where she's sitting behind the steering wheel. That's the part that I find weird with Adventures with Purpose. Did they honestly think they were going to find her sitting behind the steering wheel? Like, I'm alive, I'm just going to sit here. I can imagine that being the case if you maybe had a heart attack, but not this situation. Bria says, if she was drunk, how much would that decrease her chance of getting out with 30 seconds to escape? Well, I think the question there is, how drunk was she? And I think that's a really good question, because if you say, if she was drunk enough to take a wrong turn, remember, she basically got lost. If she was drunk enough to take a wrong turn, drunk enough to drive into a reservoir, all the other people didn't. But if she was drunk enough to do that, then how good would she be at navigating to get out of this vehicle in a short time? I just want to thank Sharon. Sharon says, love your critical thinking. Thanks a lot for that. Moonshadow says she may not have seen any windows open. She may not have seen, and she may have seen. She may have seen, and then the light went out. So you've seen the window, but now the light's gone, and your world is turning around you. John Hammer says, after panic, no time left. Sarah Terry says, loss of situational awareness is a factor in plane crashes too. If you think about, it's not just the surprise of it, it's also, there may have been, to some extent, quite a hard, not like she's going to get injured, but quite a unexpected, the car hitting that, the slope goes level and then it slopes severely down towards the water. That may have been quite a hard knock. She was going at even quite a slow speed. Her vehicle may have gone like this. That would have been a big shock, and then hitting the water, another shock. So there may have been 5 or 10 seconds where she didn't know what was happening. And now you've got to catch up through this fog of not only disorientation, but also drunkenness, plus the darkness. Suddenly dark, what do you do now? Fuzzer says she might have thought the back of the car was the front of the car as it was so pitch dark. Absolutely. She wouldn't have known really where she was with the lights out. Kendi says, does it show broken window in underwater film? That's a great question. The answer is yes. The answer is when they descend into, and by the way, you can watch it now if you want to, it's available. When they descend onto the driver's side and the window is intact. And you know that because the flashlight, the diver's flashlight reflects off the glass. You can see the steering wheel, you can see the flashlight reflecting off the glass. Then he goes around to the other side and he does say, passenger windows broken. So before anyone touched the vehicle, they found the passenger window was broken. Yeah, poor Kiely. Moonshadow says, and we know she was intoxicated unless the tow truck driver is right. Yeah. Setlik says, I'm a spelunker. I've tested this. Darkness is disorientating to what your mind believes is the right way. I would turn the light on and find I was going the wrong way. Spelunking is another word for cave orienting, or hiking through caves, I guess. So I think that is a big reason for what happened to her. Is she was disoriented in the dark. So I want to tell you guys something that happened to me. I mentioned it briefly in another video. I was swimming. I was about 18 years old, maybe 19 years old, and I was doing a sea swim in the Cape off Clifton. It was about a mile out and back. And there'd just been a storm, and the storm pulled even colder water. So the water there's always very cold. It's Atlantic Ocean water, but very, very cold. And because there was a storm, the water was even colder. And because there was a storm, there was this salty foam that made it hard to breathe and not breathe this in. But anyway, I got to about 3/4 through the swim. And I just felt like, and I'm a strong swimmer, but I just felt like I just can't do this because I'm cold. It wasn't a case of I'm not strong enough. It was a case of I'm so cold, I just can't do this. So I actually gave up. I was like, I can't do this. And I put my hands up and I was sort of waving, like, save me. And the idea was, the shore in front of me was this thin yellow line. And I remember thinking, if they see me, and I thought, I don't know if they would see me because I can barely see anyone on this thin yellow line in front of me. I probably had half a mile to go. So I'd swim out 1 mile and I'd swim back half a mile, and I had still half a mile to go. And I basically felt, I can't do this. It's just too cold. I was swimming without a wetsuit in about 11 degrees of water, no swimming cap, and I actually didn't even have breakfast. So I was just absolutely empty. And although, as I said, I was a strong swimmer, I just felt like I can't do this. I'm giving up. And so I lifted my hands above the water, and I was like waving. And I just thought, if they see me and they come out right now, I still don't think I'm going to survive. Like I thought, if I paddle water here, the time it's going to take them to reach me, it's going to take too long. You know, if it's 3 or 4 minutes or 5 minutes, I'm not going to be able to survive just paddling the water. And how I knew that was every second I did this, it felt like the cold was biting deeper into me. It was just like unbearable. I remember the moment I went into that water when the race began. It felt like my face was purple. It was a feeling of, this water is so cold it's unbearable, but I nevertheless bore it, right? But something like an hour later, I couldn't kind of handle it anymore. And so I lifted my hands up, and as I say, every second that passed by, I felt like kind of like I'm dying. I was like, this cold is eating into me. You know, like the outer skin was like cold, and my core temperature was starting to get cold as well. And so I just, I remember putting my hands up and actually sinking under the water. And there was a moment, I thought about it the other day. There was a moment where I may have sunk half a meter or maybe a meter under the surface of the sea. So in other words, I lifted my hands up and but I'm in a very weakened state. And then I literally sank under the surface of the water, and I sank down. And I thought in my mind, in a very calm way, I thought, wow, if I died now, it would be so easy and so peaceful. And I looked up to the sea, you know, the surface, and the surface was getting a bit further away. And then I pulled myself back to the surface, and I think I waved again, and I almost sank again. And then I just felt like, well, you're going to have to save yourself. And I just made the decision, just swim for the shore, right? Just swim for the shore. And the distance was quite great. As I said, it was easily a quarter of a mile, maybe even half a mile. But I'd swum as a kid. I'd swum like 5 days a week, 6 days a week, training, often with very little sleep, or sometimes very early in the morning. So I was, in a way, programmed to swim almost subconsciously. But anyway, I just remember saying, just swim. And it was almost like I woke up and my fingers were scratching on the kelp where the beach was. It was almost like, because I don't remember that long swim. I remember saying just swim, and it was almost like some kind of robotic, automatic thing took over. And as I said, I felt the next thing that I remember, I was scraping the bottom of the beach, and there was some kelp there. And then I tried to stand up, but I couldn't. I mean, I could swim barely. When I got to the beach, I couldn't actually stand up. And the amazing thing is, although it called for help, no one actually came out. I guess nobody saw me. And there wasn't even anyone standing on the beach there, like ready to, you know, like do the Baywatch thing. But when I started stumbling out onto the beach, I couldn't actually stand up. My body was so weak. And so as I stumbled out, about 5 or 6 lifeguards ran out. They realized, wow, this guy is in trouble. And then I think I was basically about to collapse in the water, you know, trying to stand, finding that I actually don't have the strength to stand. And then all of these guys picked me up like at the same time, and they picked me up with my head at the lowest point. And I think there were 3 on the one side, 3 on the other side, and they sort of ran with me. They obviously trained lifeguards. And I just remember almost like I wasn't there, almost like I was out of body. It wasn't out of body, but I just remember this dull consciousness where I thought, where I could hear my breathing. And I was kind of breathing like this, like that. So I was so hypothermic. Sorry, I was so hypothermic that that I could barely breathe. And so they rushed me into the shower, and they put the shower on like really, really hot, piping hot. You could see the steam coming out. They put me on a chair inside the shower, and they were like rubbing the blood back into my arms and so on. And about 5 or 10 minutes went by. After about 5 or 10 minutes, I started shaking a little bit, and then continued rubbing me. And the craziest part was somewhere in all of this, photographer actually got into the shower, like the front of the shower. And I remember two, like, you know, when the flash goes off, I remember the flash going off. And so I was conscious of that. And then after that, I started shivering, and I was shaking uncontrollably. So it was about 5 or 6 minutes, maybe longer, under this hot shower before I actually started shivering. And yeah, and so I survived. But that, I think, is one of the closest I've ever come to death. And it was in water. And there was this weird moment where I felt like I made a choice. I felt like I was struggling, I was suffering, I was dying, and I felt like I struggled back to life. And there's a weird part to all of that where I don't really quite know how I did it. I mean, I obviously did do it, but it's kind of inexplicable, because I remember saying just swim, but how I swam, I really don't know. It was like the mechanism of my body took over. And I can tell you, if I had 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 beers and I was in that situation, it probably would have been so easy just to switch off, and then that is death. It would have been so easy to succumb. The little bit of processing power I had because of being sober allowed me to make a rational decision. The other thing that kept me alive was moving. Moving kept me alive. You know, the fact that I swam kept my core temperature above a critical level. If I'd stayed in that position, just like, wow, I'm so weak, I just can't do this. If I'd stayed and waited and relied on help, and it was a life-saving beach, I would have died. So I hope that story opens up a perspective there in terms of the importance of the intoxication aspect. I think it's very important. I think it's very unfortunate. Yeah. Brenda, good to hear that. Paddy says, a terrifying experience. You cheated death, and we're all grateful that you are here with us. Well, there's something that I did when I was, I think, 19 years old. So I really could very easily have missed, well, up between then and now, 31 years of life. I could very easily, that could have been it for me. And whose fault was it? Was it foul play? Was it the lifeguard's fault? Was it somebody hit me while I was in the water? Did a shark get me? No, I was cold. Did I have nightmares? No. I did actually go to the doctor, and she said, well, you've got hypoglycemia. Did you have breakfast? And I was like, no. Yeah, it wasn't your time. Are you ex-military? I did go to the military, yeah. But I mean, I've got a background in swimming, so even so, I mean, yeah, I've had some other near-death experiences in water that definitely weren't fun. Jack says, can I just say that Kiely being drunk is only hearsay at the moment? It can only be treated as an assumption, as it hasn't been proven yet, just like the girl seen on Saturday with the car. I don't know if I agree with you that it's only hearsay. I suppose you could say it's only hearsay. Why would somebody lie about that? I mean, so Sammy was drunk, but Kiely wasn't. were all of these seniors just good seniors who didn't get up to anything? I don't know. I just find it, why on earth do you want to make that argument? It just seems insensible. It's a little bit like saying, I went to New Year's party and I didn't look at the time. It's just, yeah, I suppose it's possible that you didn't. Did you watch the video? Did I watch the video? Yes, I did watch the video. I've had at least 5 near-death experiences. It's a miracle I'm here. Stephanie, it's a miracle we're here. So we must appreciate life. Every moment is a blessing. Every month is something that we must just add meaning and appreciate. Make the most of it. It's a second chance. It's a third chance. Sorry, did you watch the video of Adventures with Purpose? Do you know I did an analysis of the video? Do you know I analyzed the video that I watched? Do you know that? Yeah, it is pretty frightening. Okay, I think before I get too worked up, I think I need to end this live. Kendi says, I do appreciate your take on the Kiely accident. I'm getting a window breaker for all my loved ones and sharing escape info. So something I want to show you guys that I haven't showed you is this image. That image. Can you guys see that? Now, what's a little bit grisly is I believe there's a certain forum where they feel like they have used unscrambling technology to see the blurred part of Kiely's vehicle. And they're saying, I can see her nose and her face and her arm and so on. And it's in that corner of the vehicle, this sort of corner that's over here, right? And in this particular image, you can see the guy's shoes are almost the width of the window. Meanwhile, what these people are talking about is that you can see almost the whole of Kiely. You can see it's almost like she's in the Superman pose or whatever, but yet it's in that tiny triangle. That's what people are doing. It's all like projection and transference. It's like, I don't know. This channel is a critical thinking channel, and you just wonder, do people want to think critically, or do you want to go off into your fantasy world? Dee says, I'm sorry, but just because my friends do something doesn't mean I have to. Okay. So when you go to a seniors party and everyone's drinking, you're not going to drink. That's the first half. And then the second half is, so the car didn't go into the reservoir because of drunk driving. So it's almost like you're saying the kind of obvious explanation isn't obvious. There's another explanation, but I don't really know what it is. What is your other explanation? Is it just, no, I don't want to believe it's an accident. So what's the other explanation? Brenda says, I watched it and cried. PB&J says, I'm assuming that Truly can was full, not empty. John says, with your step, so lucky a few times, and that's all it was, luck. Kathy says, I got my tool from AWP. They are from Bend or something. Okay. Lord Megatron. Okay. Kicking the window. Yeah, kicking the window is also something you can do. But maybe better not to drive intoxicated. Carla says, very suspicious, found in hatch. She wasn't found I'm not going to have that conversation again. Okay, wicked wave can plow you under. Yeah. CC says, I thought it was blurred out. That's what I read. Yeah, but someone apparently said that they used software that unblurs it. Facts, please. Yes, that is the idea. That is the idea. Okay, so on that note, thanks a lot for making it, guys. I thought it would actually be half as long as it was. One thing that I want to do with this channel is also observe what the other channels are doing. So to me, that's part of the narrative. It's like, how is it that 70% believe in the foul play narrative? Where does that come from? Is it fact-based? Is it logical? If it's not, what's actually going on? Is it failure to think critically? Is it people being manipulated? Is it people trying to make money? What is actually going on? Is this mainstream media journalist stupid? If she says there's no evidence to support that her death is suspicious, is she wrong, or the social media have very poor standards? What do you think the answer is? To Helen Back says, thanks for another great live. Also, mods, happy weekend. People can watch too much CSI. Okay. Kathy says, I stay in the lane of logic. Fausta says, they're using their minds to fill in the spaces. Moonshadow says, you're not taking in the tow truck driver. Yeah, it just seems suspicious that he didn't report it right in the beginning. That just seems suspicious. He didn't recognize Kiely right in the beginning. And we haven't got any, if that was the last time she was seen, in other words, if that's the last photo of her, then why have we seen another photo as the last photo? Why didn't law enforcement say, no, this is the last photo? So in other words, social media is saying we're smarter than law enforcement. I don't think we are. Social media is saying we're smarter than the mainstream media. Angel says, facts is where I remain. That's a good point. The suspicious activity at the party started the suspicious thinking. But I think you can have it both ways. You can have an accident, and you can also have things going on at a party that are none of our business, really. You might say, no, it is some of our business, except if it was you. If you were the senior and you had been engaging in underage drinking or drugs, you would say, I don't know if this is your business. It's my life. And look at what you've done to that person, so I'm not going to come forward. I don't know. Terry says, how long do you think until we hear about the autopsy, if at all? It's a tough one. If I think about the Chris Watts case, it was a while. Toxicology even longer. Will they release toxicology with the autopsy? I believe they will release it, but it might be sort of redacted. They might say, there may be a report where they say, we believe it was an accident. We found proof of intoxication, end of story. You can see that the law enforcement aren't doing any more press conferences. They've done their thing. They've sort of had enough. The case, as far as they're concerned, is over, except for the issue of the autopsy, right? The mainstream media have also moved on from it. Brett Mitchell, I'm a big fan of your channel. Thanks, Brett, but I'm about to be off. I like your dog. I agree with that. But it is a good question, Terry. I don't know if we'll get a heck of a lot of information, for example, on the toxicology, but it might be confirmation she was intoxicated, just something like that. But they don't. If the family decide they want to not release the information, I think they could. But I would also imagine the family will want it to be, if it's accidental, I think they will want that to be made explicit in order to stop the speculation. That's a good point. AWP says they seem to find most underwater victims at the wheel. I must be honest, I don't really know their channel. I think I saw them once or twice on Discovery, unless it was somebody else that's similar. But I imagine many of these victims are heart attack victims. People who were driving, had a heart attack, went off the road, something like that. And so maybe in those cases, they died sort of just before entering the water or while entering the water. This is, I think, a slightly different case. So Kai Cat says, I'm on the fence going with an accident if I was on a jury. Pauline says, teenage girls are harder to raise than teenage boys, in my opinion. Okay, so that is it. Thanks a lot, guys, for joining. I hope you found this analysis interesting, and I'll see you guys next time. Enjoy your weekend, and don't miss the Artemis launch tomorrow, especially not the True Crime Rocket Scientist here. Take care. Ciao.